Hi, guys. So today we're going to start reading a new book called Play Lewis Play. While we're reading today, your job is to visualize the story while we're reading. So when you're taking notes, your job is to either draw pictures or write sentences on what you're visualizing. What are you seeing as we're reading? So we are reading Play Lewis Play, which is a fictionalized biography, which is the story of a real person's life that includes some made-up events or characters. Biographies present events in sequential or chronological order to help readers understand what happened and when. Fictionalized biographies can include literary language and devices, and they often read like a story. A fictionalized biography may be told from the point of view of a fictional character. So, what a fictionalized biography is, it's a story of a real person's life. So, Lewis is going to be a real person who lived, and but the difference is it's going to be a story about his life, but it's going to be told more fictionalized. So, it's going to be fiction. So, it's not going to be a true story, but it's going to be based on his life. So, your job right now is to answer this question. So, think about the title and the genre of this text. What do you know about Louis Armstrong? What do you want to learn? Rate your ideas below. So, rate some of your ideas in there. It will ask you to write these ideas in the Nearpod as well. So, you're thinking about what do you know about Louis Armstrong? Look at the cover of the story to give yourself some really good ideas. Also, really important that you touch base on these different vocabulary words. They will come up later. And then this author is Muriel Harris Weinstein. She was an elementary teacher for 22 years. On her way to work every morning, she sang while driving. Her love of music was the inspiration for her first children's books. This love of music also provides her with a passion for writing about musicians and poets. The connection between poetry and music has led her to write some very jazzy blues poems. She's an octogenarian and proud of the fact that her age is a 6-syllable word. Children are her inspiration and keep her going. When she has a stressful day or feels anxious, she chews bubblegum, and all of her stress and worries go away. So that's a little bit about Muriel Harris Weinstein, who's the author of this book. I love that they wrote about how, like, when she has a bad day, she chews bubblegum because it gets her stress out. I love that. Play Lewis Play. So the True Story of a Boy and His Horn by Muriel Harris Weinstein, illustrated by Patrick Morgan. So remember, as we're reading, your job is to visualize. You have to think about what words the author is using and what picture you're creating in your mind. Either draw little pictures in the margins or write sentences about what you're seeing. Louis Armstrong, also known as Satchmo, was an American jazz singer and trumpeter who came to be known as one of the most influential figures in jazz music. Armstrong started out playing in local brass band parades, looking to older musicians for inspiration. His hero, cornet player and jazz great Joe King Oliver, eventually became Armstrong's mentor and gave him what may have been his biggest break. Armstrong's story is one of talent, passion, and commitment, and who better to tell it than his truest companion, his very own trumpet. One day, Joe Oliver, the Joe Oliver, Lewis's hero, asked Lewis to stop by and play a few bars of music. The best part was that Lewis brought me along. Me, his hock shop horn. I wanted to impress Joe Oliver too. Joe thought Lewis was a natural. He took a real interest in him. Not like the other musicians who were too busy rushing around or had no time to bother with a kid. Joe gave him tips on playing. He even let Lewis carry his cornet. In the world of honky-tonk musicians, this was one cool honor. You see, Joe Oliver was the main man in New Orleans jazz. Then, Joe Oliver asked Louis to sit in with his combo one night. Louis was as nervous as a fly in a spider's web. He thought every musician in Joe's band was better than he was. Louis walked to the front of the stage. They had no mics then. Louis tilted his head back and blew a new kind of blues, blowing notes higher than anyone had ever heard, holding them longer than anyone else. Notes that moaned, then turned sugar sweet and soared so high they touched the moon. One by one, each note turned colors. First blue, then lazy purple, then spinning around like pink molasses and cotton candy, then into swirls of rainbow colored ribbons. All floated down as soft as velvet, turning in the air, curling into your ears. So at this point, I want you to stop and I want you to write down or draw what you're seeing. What's happening here? Now we know from that little intro over here where it's italicized that this is telling Louis's story through the eyes of his trumpet. So, how would his instrument feel about him? Now, those of you who play an instrument, think about how your instrument sees you and sees your experiences based on your experiences in band or orchestra. How does that instrument see you? So, jot down some pictures or some notes about what you're seeing in this scene. After you jot those down, we're going to look at one clear sentence. So the sentence I want to focus on is this topic right here, where it talks about a hock shop horn. Does anyone know? So think in your head, what's a hock shop? And this might not be something that you know, but a hock shop is kind of like a Salvation Army. It's like used things that you buy that somebody has already owned or used, so they're kind of older. So think about what an old trumpet would look like. Maybe it would be worn. Maybe it would have some scratches on it. Maybe it would have, so if I look at this picture, you see how it's like black in these little parts? So maybe like um the metal on the outside is chipped or fading. So just by saying it's a hock shop horn, there's things that I can think about how it looks. It's not brand new from the store. It's not shiny all the way around the outside. It's worn, it's old, it maybe has scratches on it or chips where the metal is coming out. It's older looking. So the next part that I want you to think about is where it's right here. It says Louis was as nervous as a fly in a spider's web. What do you think that sentence means? What are you seeing in your head? Louis was as nervous as a fly in a spider's web. Make sure you take a note here. What does that look like to you? What are you feeling? Once you're done with that, you're going to turn the page. Louis blew with such a passion. He swung with such rhythm that his music made you snap your fingers or swing your hips. More band leaders started noticing Louis. They liked his style. They thought he was so darn good. They invited him to sit in with their bands. Sitting in was a way to try out. If the band leader liked you, he might offer you a spot. Before you could sing Potato Head Blues, Lewis was swinging away, trying out each night. When Lewis played, he felt he was home. Night after night, he experimented with music. He tested his ideas, wanting to make music no one else had tried and no one else had heard, trying to find the music he heard in his head. His music flew free, and his rhyme was so contagious that every musician, even the cats in Joe Oliver's band, wanted to follow his style. It was as if it was part of Lewis and he was part of me. My sound was his voice. I mean, the horn was Lewis. Sound crazy? No. That's why we weren't just buddies. We were brothers. His music set everyone in a fever, and Joe Oliver's ears grew as large as elephants as he listened to Lewis play his cornet. It wasn't long before Joe Oliver said, "You're in, Lewis. I'll give you $1 a night." So the first thing that I want you to think about is, what does it mean when they're saying that to experiment with music? What does that really mean? So some of the answers that you could answer to that question is, to make new kinds of music that you haven't heard before, to play new rhythms, to see how the audience responds. So it's kind of crazy for us to think about, right? Like, we listen to music on the radio and we think that that's always been there, but it hasn't. At some point, somebody created that style of music. So this is a really interesting little tidbit of jazz music. So when it talks about the cats in the band, so right here it talks about the cats in Joe Oliver's band. That doesn't mean real cats. It's not talking about little cats running around. It means the band members. So the members in the band were the cats. So if the members in the band wanted to follow his style, what does that say about him? What does it say about Lewis? The next thing I'm going to have you do is, I'm going to reread for you paragraph 8. While I'm reading, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to picture in your head what's happening. So, what is happening in this paragraph? And I really want you to close your eyes and picture it. Night after night after night, he experimented with music. He tested his ideas, wanting to make music no one else tried, no one else heard, trying to find that music he heard in his head. His music flew free, and his rhythm was so contagious that every musician, even the cats in Joe Oliver's band, wanted to follow his style. It was as if I was part of Lewis and he was part of me. My sound was his voice. I, me, the horn, was Lewis. Sound crazy? No. That's why we weren't just buddies. We were brothers. So, what are you picturing in your head? Make a note here. What are you picturing about the relationship between Lewis and his trumpet? Once you've made that note, we're going to move on to page 48. Lewis was so excited, he didn't sleep for the next 30 nights. Lewis shoveled coal all day for the Andrews Coal Company. In spite of aching muscles, he played his music every night, all night. Nothing was going to keep him from Joe Oliver's band. Lewis was the best cornet player in the band. He was so good. Joe and Lewis started playing duets. They'd get up to the front of the stage and take turns playing solos. It was as if the horns were talking to each other, telling secrets, laughing and teasing, chasing one another around corners. But they mostly played together. Joe Oliver would take the lead and Louis would follow with clever harmony underneath Joe's melody. What Louis did was not as an easy breezy thing to do. He had to be good, yet he couldn't suddenly burst out in a wild melody, strutting his stuff because Oliver was the leader of the band and the lead horn player. About that time, Chicago, the jazz center of the world, offered Joe Oliver a job at the famous Lincoln Gardens. It was what Joe Oliver dreamed of. He had to go, but he was worried about leaving Louis. He knew Louis never wanted to leave New Orleans. Louis always told Joe that the New Orleans mud was in his shoes. One night, Joe invited Louis home for supper. Of course, they talked only about music, but Joe also tried to make Louis see that it was important to move forward, not only in music, but also to other parts of the country. Joe told Louis, "You gotta grow. You can't stay in the same place playing the same music. I know you love trying new ideas. You belong in Chicago." So think in your brain, what is happening? What do you see happening? What does this picture show is happening between Louis and Joe? Once you finish taking that note and really visualizing what's happening right now in the story, you can continue on in the Nearpod.